All right, we'll get rolling with our next speaker. Our topic's going to be Born to Live, Maximizing Piglet Survival via Altered Nutrition from Hyperprolific Sows. And obviously, from an interest standpoint, if you know anything about what's going on in the world and those sows that have been producing a lot of litters and the people that manage them, that comes from Denmark. So our first speaker, Dr. Peter Theil, comes from Aarhus University within Denmark. Peter is a senior scientist at Aarhus University and was recently appointed adjunct professor at Swine Agricultural University. He did his PhD in 2002 on energy and protein metabolism in gestating and lactating sows. During his postdoc, he spent 4 months in Illinois in 2003 in Walter Hurley's lab. Since then, he has worked with mammary development, colostrum, and milk production, and mainly focused on improving nutrition for the late gestating and lactating sows. And personally, I know after having spent several years and many visits to Denmark that the experience with large litters is quite a challenge. So from a nutritional standpoint, we're going to hear that information today. During the last 8 years, considerable attention has been given to understanding how those nutrients are taken up from the gastrointestinal tract, utilized by central organs like liver, uterus, and the mammary gland. So please welcome Dr. Peter Theil.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and very happy to be here. Today I'll talk about how we can speed up the farrowing, how we can have the sow to produce hopefully as much colostrum as possible, and also I will deal with when is colostrum actually produced, how is it produced, and then I'll end up concluding about how can we feed sows better during the lactation. So if we go back in time, 25 years, we started to breed for higher prolificacy in sows, and we have actually been very successful, and that has challenged the entire industry because the sows now has a greater farrowing length. They need to produce more colostrum, they need to produce more milk because of this high or great litters. And the good question is, can we improve these traits nutritionally? That's what I'm working with. Focusing on the stillbirth rates, we have seen that from 1999 to 2008 or 9, it increased steadily. But in 2004, there was a genetic modification in the selection or the breeding goals. So they changed from breeding for total born, as many total born as possible, to have as many live born piglets at day 5. And that takes typically 4 years. Here it took 5 years to have a significant impact in the production. And you can see since then we have actually declined slightly over time the number of stillborn piglets. So just the genetic things is helping us. Well, how do I see my role? The genetics to me is they're changing the engine of the sow. We are, as nutritionists, we're working on the fuel. And these two have to fit together, so if the genetics change something, we should also kind of change the fuel. In 2014, I was asked by Chantal Farmer to contribute to the book that was launched in 2015. And I was asked to deal with transition feeding. And at that time, one of the things, I got a new project at that time focusing on the farrowing length, and I really start to wonder what is it that is going on here. I just plotted the data I had available from my own studies at that point. I could see there was clearly a relationship between the number of stillborn piglets and the farrowing length. But we couldn't really tell at that time which one came first. Today we are very sure that an extended farrowing time, that is the reason why we see a greater number of stillborn piglets. And I'll show you why I came to that conclusion. But I really at that point started to think a lot about the very last meal that a sow is ingesting just before she starts to farrow. And why that? Let's take a look at what happens with this last meal. Slightly more than 50% of that meal will be starch. What happens to the starch? Well, it's digested in the stomach and taken up as glucose in the small intestine. And that process looks like this. If we look at it quantitatively, it peaks, they are fed here at time 0, and already half an hour later, 30 minutes later, the highest uptake of energy from starch is coming into the portal blood. So it goes very, very rapidly. But you can also see from this figure that it drops very rapidly. So starch is a fast energy source, and it disappears as fast again. This is just exactly as if you're going yourself to McDonald's, eat a burger. Next time you see a McDonald's, you're already hungry again. 2 hours, it can make you satiated. That's the same that happens when we feed pigs or sows with starch. But then we did some surgeries with sows and put in catheters and took some blood samples, and we plotted on the x-axis our data, the number of hours that passed from the last meal until the farrowing started. And then on the y-axis here we plotted the arterial glucose representing the energy status of these sows. And suddenly we realized, hey, it seems to be quite a strong relationship. I admit, we only had 10 sows here. These multi-catheterized sows take a huge effort for us to, we can only handle up to 10 sows, that's what we did. But I was pretty sure when I saw these data, something is really wrong here. Especially those 2 sows that were out here. A sow with a plasma glucose of 2 millimoles per liter, that's really, really low. I have had piglets in my hand having 2 millimoles of glucose. They were so weak they could barely have their own head being held. So this is really dramatic. Then we went back to 7 old colostrum studies we have been doing and plotted them on the same axis. So number of hours going from the last meal was fed until the farrowing started. And suddenly we realized, hey, this is something we can do better, right? According to this, we can see that sows, if they are lucky to start the farrowing within the first 3 hours after the last meal is fed, they can complete the farrowing within 4 hours. But if they are unlucky and start later on, the farrowing duration simply increases quite dramatically. Think of a sow that has not been eating for 8 hours. On average, they should spend 10 hours just giving birth. What happens when a sow farrow? She is not standing up and taking the next meal. She continues the farrowing. She is becoming more and more depleted of energy. At the same time, we were working on another project where we focused on colostrum production and fiber. And in that project, we didn't see an impact of colostrum that should have been giving a improvement in pre-weaning mortality here. But what we saw was that the fiber supplement in late gestation actually decreased the number of stillborn piglets quite dramatically. And that really makes sense suddenly to us, because what is happening with these fibers? We have roughly 15% of dietary fiber in the lactation diets. They go and end up being fermented in the hind gut, and that these short-chain fatty acids that are being produced there, that will be taken up to the portal blood and be utilized as an energy source. And you can see here, if we feed low fiber diets, we have a low uptake. If we feed high fiber diet, we have a high uptake. And one other thing you can see is you don't have a postprandial peak like from the glucose. It's completely flat. That means if we want to increase the amount of energy coming from fiber, we can just feed them more. And it's simply a matter of how many grams of fiber we feed them on a daily basis. So there's a Finnish group that has been working on farrowing duration and fiber and feces consistency. And they've had some success in understanding what happens. They've been making a very nice feces consistency score, and they recommend number 3 consistency. And they have realized that the farrowing duration is decreasing if the feces become more and more soft. That makes good sense, because one of the things that can actually cause stillborn piglets is if the sows are having constipation. So physically, constipation can block the birth canal. I've been giving birth to many sows, and you can easily feel when you give birth assistance if that sow has a problem with constipation. And if you had a hard time getting your hand inside to help a piglet out, for sure that piglet also have a hard time finding out itself. But I would also say that their response here is actually, I think part of it could be the feces consistency, but I think also this could be related with fiber, because fiber is producing more soft feces. Take sugar beet pulp as the best example. So I think these are not contradicting data, it actually support each other very well. This is another thing that actually support our data very well. It's a Slovakian study where they focused on protein content in the sow feed. The requirement is roughly 13 in late gestation, and they saw that increasing protein content that would cause a higher farrowing length. But I've tried to put their feed ingredients into some calculation spreadsheet, and I could see there was a very, very strong negative contribution of fiber. So as the protein content increased, the dietary fiber decreased. A very, very bad design, and they concluded on the protein, but I think actually the response they saw was mainly driven by the dietary fiber. So again, I think this supports very well what we have seen, that more fiber is really beneficial for the sows at parturition. We went further into our data and split the sows into 3 categories. Green sows, that's those that are having adequate energy. Yellow sows, they are having moderately lacking energy. And the red sows, they are severely lacking energy, based on how many hours they are just by chance having from the last meal until they start the farrowing. And I was quite surprised that we actually were able to see a significant difference between these 3 groups. When we hear how many sows should we have if we want to deal with stillbirth rate, people say something 300 per group, 500 per group, 1,000 per group. And typically people don't really focus on this. But with just 166 in total, we were actually able to show a difference, because we know how many hours passed from the last meal until onset of farrowing. And I'm very, very sure that's the most important parameter to start with. We could also see there was a clear relationship between energy status of the sow and the frequency of birth assistance. So sows with adequate energy hardly required any birth assistance, 0.5%, and those that were severely lacking energy, 10 times more piglets, so 5% of the piglets needed help to being born. I think these piglets were happy that we were there present. In many private farms, people are not there. They just have to wait until they eventually become born by the sow. So for me, a sow that is giving birth, that's like running a marathon. At the best, it takes 2 hours. On average, 4 hours. But it can really last a long time if you hit what we call hit the wall and become depleted of energy. And if you are at 2 millimoles per liter, you are really depleted of energy. Colostrum yield, colostrum intake, it's highly, highly important. If a piglet do not consume any colostrum, it will not be alive a couple of days later. This was shown in a French study by Elaine Cannell and co-workers, where they have measured the colostrum intake, and they have measured how many piglets that survived and categorized them into how much colostrum they ingested. They underestimated the colostrum intake by 34%, so the actual values down here is actually somewhat higher, but that's a story I don't want to touch upon today. Looking into what is really important for a piglet to survive, I would love to say we had to focus on the sow. But for sure, the piglet, the colostrum intake of each and individual piglet is the most important parameter. If we can ensure all piglets ingest 250 grams of colostrum, we have done so much we can do to achieve a good survivability. But in practice, with the salary we have in Denmark, Europe, US, I would guess as well, we are not having a lot of people that can be there giving birth assistance and make sure to help each and every piglet once a sow is in trouble. We have to have the sow to make the work for us to give birth, to produce colostrum, to produce milk. We have to have the sow working for us. How do we do that? I'll come back to that. The third thing, colostrum quality. For these three things here, colostrum quality is clearly the least important parameter we can talk about. But if we look into the scientific literature, you can turn these upside down. Clearly, most studies has been done on colostrum quality because it's pretty easy to take a colostrum sample. It's really, really hard work to measure the colostrum intake of each and individual piglet. These are data from our studies where we have seen that the litter size, as it increases, the colostrum yield is increasing until approximately 15 piglets in the litter. Then it levels off and reach a plateau. Why is that? We have also calculated the intake capacity of all the piglets. We know what the birth weight were. We know a certain birth weight is equivalent to a certain size of the stomach, and then we know how much they can ingest. So this is the calculated intake capacity of the entire litter. And it seems to be quite a good agreement between this calculated capacity and what we have observed. So as we have small litters, the intake capacity is actually the limiting factor of the sow colostrum production. But as we pass 15, the sow becomes the limiting factor. That is something we have to understand. And we are for sure, we have passed this point. We need now to understand how can we have the sow to produce more colostrum based on how we should feed the sow or whatever we can do to change her productivity. If we look at the colostrum intake of the piglets, we see a steady decrease. As litter size is increasing, the colostrum intake per piglet is decreasing. And you can see a scary scenario, I would say. If we ever hit 25 piglets in the litter, I hope we never will, I think our prediction is that everything will crash. Because at that time, the sow will not even be able to give enough colostrum for the mean piglet, meaning the piglet mortality will increase dramatically. You can also see that here on this figure I've plotted 60 different farrowings. So one sow, one farrowing is here horizontally. The blue up here is the piglet in that first farrowing which ingested most colostrum, down to the piglet that ingested least colostrum, and that ranges just all across from 50 grams of colostrum up to 800 grams of colostrum. Really a huge variation among piglets, even within a litter. And the red spots, they represent the mean productivity of the sow or the mean uptake of piglets in that litter, and you can see also a huge variation among sows. The really nice thing for a farmer would be to know which sows are below or close to the critical limit of 250 grams of colostrum. Because in that case, it's not only one or two piglets that risk end up dying. Now we're speaking about half a litter. And there are three things we have realized is really important and that can be used to reveal which sows are producing a very low amount of colostrum. If sows are having a low feed intake prepartum, if they have feed residues, my alarm bells are ringing. It's okay with a single meal if it's just before the farrow, otherwise they should eat everything. The next thing is a large litter, 26 piglets or more, then we are down on the previous figure where not even the medium piglet will be able to survive. And the third thing is if all the piglets are having a mean birth weight of 900 grams, so a lot of small piglets, they are also not really capable of ingesting a lot and stimulating or taking all with what the sow can produce. So 3 factors, and we can see each of these if we are in the barn. And right after the sow has farrowed, we can understand if we have a sow where we have a problem here. We need to give her extra attention. We've been looking into fibers. We've actually been looking into many different dietary components to have the sow to produce as much colostrum as possible. And at the moment, I'm a bit disappointed with what we have achieved in this area. The best we have been doing was the very first experiment, I believe. We fed fibers throughout gestation, and we have a very high productivity of the sows. This is now gain in grams per piglet during the colostrum period. And the best was if we used sugar beet pulp or pectin residue. But if we use the same amount of fiber coming from potato pulp, they really failed. And we don't really know why we do see these differences in fiber sources. That's something we really have to understand better. And consistently we see if we use a standard diet with roughly 15 to 17% of fiber, they give in the area of 90 to 95 grams of piglet gain in the colostrum period. And this is also what we saw here. We've tried to give sugar beet pulp closer to parturition, not seeing a very impressive result. Well, maybe it starts to pull in the right direction. Maybe they didn't get enough fiber. Maybe they didn't get it for enough days. I don't know. I don't really know it. And then a French group has tested a mix of fiber and not found anything. My personal feeling is soybean hulls are not the best. I guess there's something wrong with these fiber, just like we have seen with the potato pulp. But we don't have really the demonstration. I've just seen 3 different trials now where it seems to pull a bit downwards. So if I was going to make a diet, I would clearly choose another fiber source than soybean hulls. We have been thinking about, since we are not really have realized or got a breakthrough with this colostrum, when is it really produced? We took some biopsies some years ago on day minus 14 and then minus 10, minus 6, minus 2 and 1 day after parturition. Sent them to Illinois and they analyzed them for transcriptomics, and this is what it came out. Nothing really happens until day minus 6, and then suddenly from day minus 6 to minus 2, a lot happens. And again from minus 2 to plus 1, really a lot of genes are differentially expressed. When I saw these data, I was really sure, hey, now we know when colostrum is being produced. The last 6 days before parturition. Now, I'm very, very sure this is telling us when the mammary gland is growing, not when the colostrum is being produced. How can I be so sure about that? Well, we did some surgeries, put in catheters before and after the mammary gland. A third catheter where we could infuse a blood flow marker, so we could quantify the blood flow. We could quantify how many nutrients are being taken up to the blood, or from the blood to the mammary gland. And we infused the blood flow marker during parturition. As soon as we saw the first born piglet, we connected the pump, started the infusion, and 1 hour later, we took the first sample, and then each hour until during the first 8 hours, we measured these data. And what did we see? Above 0 here, we see how many nutrients. This is carbons. Carbons is the same as energy. How many carbons per hour is taken up by the mammary gland. That's from 0 and upwards. On the negative side, I have plotted how many carbons is being secreted through the colostrum or back to the blood in terms of carbon dioxide. And you can see there's nearly a one-to-one relation between the uptake and the output from the mammary gland, meaning that the entire colostrum production is essentially being produced after the firstborn piglet. And if you read in the literature, you would say, everybody agree, all the colostrum is being produced before the first piglet is born. Now it just needs to be released or being suckled by the piglets. But that is not true. And I think that is part of the reason why we haven't been very successful so far in improving the colostrum. I clearly hope in the near future that we can take benefit of our new findings and try to rethink how we should feed for improving the colostrum production. You can see here also that there's a difference if we feed fiber and low fiber diet. There's a minor amount of carbon we can't account for on the output side if we feed the low fiber control, and it reverses if we feed fibers. And that really makes good sense, because I think this extra fat we observe these sows are having if they are fed fiber, that is coming from the mammary glands. It is being retained in late gestation in the mammary gland, and that is becoming released when the sow is producing colostrum. And how can I know that? We have done a similar study with putting in catheters in other sows and measured the same thing in late gestation, day minus 10, day minus 3, plus 3, and plus 17. So again, uptake from the blood to the mammary gland, and below 0 we have secretion into the milk in this case, or back to the blood in terms of carbon dioxide. And what you can see here is in late gestation you have a positive balance, meaning we have a retention of carbon or retention of energy in the mammary glands. What is that? If we go through and look at all these different things here, the only thing that can be the explanation is the blue part here, which is triglyceride. So we do see a build-up of triglyceride in the mammary glands in late gestation, possibly stimulated by the fibers, which are the short-chain fatty acids. They can only be retained as the triglycerides. When we came to day 3, so early lactation, we saw a very, very negative number here, meaning now the mammary gland is secreting more carbon or more energy than it actually takes up. How can that happen? Because a lot of fat is retained in the mammary epithelial cells or the mammary fat pad, and then it's released, allowing a lot more energy or carbon to be released than is being taken up. But that can only happen for a couple of days. That is probably why we do see a lot of fat in transient milk, which is produced on day 2 to 4. And at peak lactation, we didn't see a balance that was significantly different from 0. So going back to the colostrum, why did we see that sows fed fiber throughout the gestation period produced more colostrum, and not more colostrum when they were fed only for a week? That has been puzzling me for quite some time. I know it takes some time to start to digest these fiber, but they will start to ferment quite fast and should be able to produce some short-chain fatty acids even within a few days. Is it because the mammary glands become adapted to oxidize more ketogenic substrates? That's one of my working hypotheses I have at the moment. Or is it that a greater part of the fat, as I have told you, is being retained in the mammary gland and being released? I guess I'm more fan of the second one than the first one at the moment, but I would really like to see some good illustration of what is going on. So fiber is really important, both for the farrowing process, as I told you before, but also for the colostrum. But we also still need to understand what are the real mechanisms, what is really going on. Maximizing milk yield and feed efficiency. This is from a US study with more than 11,000 sows. They were back fat scanned and litter weight gain was recorded. And we can see that compared to the best performing sows, which are 17 to 18 millimeter of back fat when they enter the farrowing unit, then skinny sows produce 10% less litter weight gain. And if they are obese, they are producing 13% less. So clearly some worse productivity if the back fat is not appropriate. In Denmark, we use the recommendation of 16 to 19, so that is very well in line with this US study. But what about mobilization? Is that good or is it bad for the productivity, for the feed efficiency? Now we have looked at the productivity, but what about the feed efficiency? We would like to feed the sows which will allow them to produce milk, but we also know that some mobilization is occurring. What is the feed efficiency when milk is produced from feed? That is 78%, meaning 22% is lost as heat. What if it's produced from mobilized energy? It's actually 89. It's even more efficient if it's produced from mobilization. But we have to account for that mobilization needs to be restored. Lost body reserves needs to be restored. So we have to take that into account, and that is causing another loss of 27%. So combining these data means that mobilization plus restoring is 65% efficiency, or that we lose 35% of heat, which should be compared to 22% lost as heat. So the better feed efficiency we can have is when we have the sow to produce as much milk directly from the diet each and every day. We have also looked into how the sow is utilizing the energy in the diet depending on how sows are fed in terms of protein. We have So we have tested what happens with the energy utilization if we feed sows surplus of good protein. A lot of farmers do that, and a lot of farmers is not really using a lot of crystalline amino acids. What happens if the sow has to oxidize excessive amount of protein? You can see that here. The second treatment here is right at the spot of the dietary recommendation in Denmark. And what happens if we go above? The sow is utilizing less energy for milk production, and they have to take more from the body. So you can really see on this slide that sows are being drained of energy somehow if they are eating more protein than they require. How can I be sure that 12.8 is pretty close to our requirement? We did a follow-up study the year after and figured out that 12.5 is exactly the spot-on requirements if we want to maximize litter average daily gain. So what happens when we go below? We lose productivity. If we go above the requirement, we lose feed efficiency. So this is a balance, exactly what we know from the growing pigs. I don't think it's new, but it's new that we can actually show it in pigs. So looking at the barriers, we tend to want to increase that level because we know that is the limiting factor for milk production, milk protein production. But we should also consider how can we reduce or minimize the excessive protein by including more crystalline amino acids. Time expired?
Hey, you might be.
Oh, battery turned off. Okay.
Yeah. So we lose energy because the sow is secreting more energy in the urine and also as heat. and I have talked about this. So undersupply of crude protein means lower productivity, and oversupply means lower feed efficiency. A final study, we have tried to use silanase to improve the feed efficiency of the sows, and it actually turned out to be pretty good. We could increase slightly the feed intake of the sows, we could improve the energy digestibility, and we could reduce the weight loss of the sows. We couldn't really impact the milk yield, but overall this is also an indication of we improve the feed efficiency of the sows. And so just to conclude, this is the last slide. Sows, if they lack energy, they are having a trouble with farrowing. They need more energy. At the moment, we recommend at least 3 daily meals. They also benefit from having fibers, both for the farrowing, but also for the colostrum production. We have seen good colostrum production with sugar beet pulp and also pectin residues. We would like in the near future to study other fiber sources, because I think there's something that we need to do better. We've realized that colostrum is being produced right after piglets are being born, not before. And feed efficiency can be increased by controlling back fat very, very carefully. If we use feed that is close to the recommended levels, not too high, not too low, and clearly by avoiding over and undersupply of dietary protein. And I think it's very cheap to add silanase to the feed if it has a good response. As we have been seeing, there's no reason not to do that. So thank you very much for your attention.